So we're here with the last monthly reading wrap-up of 2024. This was a slower month. I only read 2 books and they were nearly identical. I would say out of like everything I've read this year, these are so incredibly similar. So first up, I did start the month with Leigh Bardugo's The Familiar, which this has been like a really long awaited read for me because it is a personality trait of mine to be in love with Six of Crows by the same author, but I haven't actually read those in quite a few years. So I really didn't know how I would react to this, but I had really, really high hopes. And it was fun to go back to Bardugo's writing, and the like language and the use of language is very, very fun in this book. You do have to focus. At least I did. I read it as part of a challenge to see how much reading I could get done if I rode the bus to and from work every day in a week. And with all of those distractions, it was really, really hard to get sucked into this. Ultimately, it was fun to be back in Bardugo's writing, but I do just want to go back and read Six of Crows. This didn't quite hit home for me. I think I'm just in a space where it's not necessarily fun to read a big story about a group of people who are cast aside for being special or other within their own communities or within their local communities. Like, I just didn't really need that. But I also went into this blind, so I didn't really know that that's what I was getting. This didn't do it for me, but I did have a lot of fun revisiting Bardugo's writing, and it was nice that it was a standalone. I'll say that too. In the middle of that, I realized I had to bust a move on my book club book for the month, and that was Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. And this, also a witch story, slapped. This was a home run. I didn't pick this. This was probably the only book club book out of the year, so 12 book club books, that I didn't pick, and I was like, I'm so glad I read that. I was initially mad that somebody was picking a book that starts a series because I was like, of course, we're all gonna read this and there's gonna be no real resolution because they want to leave you hanging for the second book. But not only did I enjoy it so much that I probably will go pick up the second book, but I did feel like you do get a complete story in this. And it is kind of weird because it's YA, but I was reading this like, should this be YA? I don't know. Maybe the rules have changed since like the Hunger Games. I don't know. This one was like the witch story I wanted. And the other one, The Familiar, was just a really sad witch story. This one had a lot of badassery going on, and it had a lot of romantic tropes, but they were all kind of like intertwined, I'd say. So they didn't pop out as vividly, and I think that made it fun because you didn't really know which domino was gonna fall first in the grand scheme of like who ends up with who, and everything was kind of constantly flipping and flopping back and forth, but like in a way that kept your attention. So absolute home run. I think the second book might already be out, and I don't know how many there will be, but I will continue to check the rest of these out from my library. So yeah, I read 2 books this month. Both of them were witchy winter reads, and it's really odd that I read them at the same time, because out of my whole reading year, these 2 are weirdly close together. So since this is December and I'm reflecting on all of these videos and what I've read each month, I thought that it would be fun to go through my StoryGraph stats for the year. So for 2024, my reading goal was 50 books. I achieved that, which I kind of really suspected I would. It wasn't going to be a stretch, with 59 books. 7 of which I do feel a need to flag as they were volumes of comics, so they were trades. And I don't know that is as much of a time sacrifice as a regular book is, so it's hard for me to weigh them, but you are like intently reading them, so I don't know. 52 books, if you will, for regular size reads. I think that honestly I'm gonna keep it at 50 for 2025 because to me, I would rather have a goal that I know I can achieve, and I still have to push myself to, but like find other goals within that. So yes, I'm gonna stay at 50 books for the next year, but within that, I wanna read 3 books I already own for every 1 book I buy. And I have nearly 50 books on my physical TBR. And so like, I want this year to be a year of going through those, because at one point I was immensely excited about each one of those books, and I have yet to pick them up. So nothing has like died, and none of those like excited emotions have simmered. So it's time to kind of like cash in. And then with that, I have a lot of big books sitting on that shelf that I was intimidated to read because they would maybe take longer, and I didn't want to pull away from my reading goal or my book count. But if I know that I can achieve 50, and then the stretch becomes, can I achieve 50 books that have a larger page count than I normally would read, then that feels really good to me. If I'm looking at my moods out of my 19,000 pages read this year, my top one is overwhelmingly emotional, and then it's kind of tied with dark and adventurous. I mostly rate my books, well, like overwhelmingly, at a medium pace, and very few are slow pace. That's not very interesting. My page number, this is what I was talking about with my bigger reads and being a little bit intimidated by those thicker books on my shelf. My page count, 2/3 of it are under 500 pages. And then you have 1/3 of it being less than 300 pages. And then a very, very small sliver of 2 books that are 500 plus pages. One of which is 11/22/63 that I recently finished, and then the other one is the master edition of From Hell by Alan Moore, which is just this absolute hunk of a graphic novel. So I'd really like to increase that section of my pie chart in the coming year. And I think that's really doable if I stay within 50 books. I'm reading fiction, 93% fiction to 7% nonfiction. This isn't necessarily something that I want to change, it's something that I feel obligated to improve upon, but at the same time, I'm reading because it's my hobby, and I'm reading my interests, and I'm reading as a form of entertainment, so I don't feel an actual need other than this like intellectual pressure to switch that up. My top genres, so this is where it's less independent, like those moods. I've got romance, contemporary, fantasy, literary, and LGBTQIA, which I'm really shocked, actually, that queer books are not like towards the top of my list. I really do feel like I prioritized queer reading this year, but I think that just goes to show how few and far between like truly good and centered queer stories are to find. I had a really low value of YA books, only 8, and what's interesting about that is that 3 of them are my reread of the Legend series by Marie Lu, and then one of them actually is Slammed by Colleen Hoover, which to me is like, maybe that squeaks by, but why is that a YA book? I think that the number of books and pages graph that we get on here is really, really interesting, especially being able to see it for the entire year. The fluctuation is crazy. I did have months within this year where I had like 7 books, and then I have months like this where I had 2 books, but overwhelmingly I felt like I was reading at a pace of about 4 books a month, but that is not what this chart really reflects, and I think that's because it's really by like pages, but it seems like I'm hanging out in around like 5 books average. Here's where I think it gets really, really interesting. My star ratings and my average rating. My average book rating, even though I pride myself on picking winners every time, my average rating is 3.84 stars. I don't feel like I'm stingy with my 5 stars. I think I am a little bit more picky, but I think that is 100% because you have the option on here to go like quarter stars. So I'm giving out a lot of 4s and a lot of 5s, but like from 3 to 5, all of those tiny increments, like there are books in there. If I was still using Goodreads, so glad I'm not, this would probably look entirely differently. I've had a lot of fun with StoryGraph the past couple of years, but I've really utilized it more, I think, this year. The one gripe I have with it, and the thing that just always catches me up, is how easy it is to accidentally select like a different edition of a book. So there are a couple of things in my stats that are wrong because I went and added the book to my currently reading, but like as an audiobook format or something, and it's not always apparent that the format is different. And I know there's that little menu, but sometimes you just don't notice. If I'm just reading it solo and I just want to put my dates on it, that's a lot more manageable. But I had that happen a couple times with buddy reads, or like maybe the buddy is reading a different book and you can't make sure it's the same, you know? But buddy reads, that's another thing. This year was the first time that I really explored buddy reads on StoryGraph, and I absolutely love that feature. My friends and I have used it for our 4-person book club all year, and it has been really, really fun because we were finding that we would get to the end of the book and we'd be at dinner and we'd be discussing it, and everybody read it at a slightly different time, or you forget with the day-to-day life things going on, or maybe the other books that you're reading, you forget your like little intrusive thoughts that you have while you're reading, and it's really fun to be able to, it's really handy to be able to go back through that StoryGraph buddy read and look at your comments and have them assigned to the pages. That, coupled with the feature of them locking or unlocking as you mark your progress, really motivates me to put my progress in and see that like I'm inching forward in the book, and kind of creates a little bit of competitiveness with the other people. I think that's really fun and a great incentive to just read, like especially when it's a book that maybe you wouldn't have necessarily picked. I had buddy reads with friends that like I don't see on a regular basis, and that's really fun too, because maybe you're in bed or whatever and you're not going to send them a text at 10:30 p.m. Oh my gosh, this just happened in the book, or like to do that and then be afraid that they're not at that point. You know where everybody is, and you can use that locking comment feature, and it's perfect. In short, I exceeded my 50 book goal for the year. I'm gonna keep 2025 at 50 with 2 caveats. One is to read 3 books on my massive physical TBR before I buy any new book. And then the second one is to read a larger percentage of more than 500 page books, or more than 499 pages, because I know I've got a good chunk of those sitting out there on that ledge, and I'm excited to read them all, but I'm just a little bit intimidated. So I think that that ultimately is a great way to head into the new year with a new reading challenge that still is fresh to me.